Okay, welcome back to another episode of Point and Click Puzzle Games, whereby myself, Angela McCall, is taking you on a journey to build a Tic Tac Toe mobile app game using the Lua programming language. And if you haven't been here before, please do subscribe to my channel and put your comments below. But the entire ethos behind my channel is that I'm helping teenagers and adults who have never coded before learn to do so using a very simple programming language such as Lua. And we have been on this journey to create a Tic Tac Toe game. So again, if you haven't watched my previous tutorials, I have a demo of the game that we're building, and we're basically layering up your coding skill set one step at a time with each of these videos. And in today's video, we are looking at for loops. Now, that's a technique to help you repeat a code or execute a command a certain number of times up until a point a certain condition is met and you stop executing the code. And that is a way of helping us to stop repeating writing lines of codes that are repetitive all the time. Okay, so I'm going to dive on over to my left-hand monitor screen and show you where we left off on our last tutorial, which was learning about functions. Now, in that we had this function that we designed that was called that was executed called draw a row, which basically jumped us up to here where we printed a row on screen in the console that you can see that this code was accessed. We created a couple of local variables that probably aren't actually going to be needed now, to be honest, because we're going to change the way we're doing things. So let's save that and run. And then what we've done is we've run this code where it's executed 3 times. So we've now called the draw square function 3 times, sending it the X and Y locations in order to stagger one box over each time to the right a new square. So this basically, its job here is literally just to design a white box with a black border to it and position it, and the positioning is controlled by this function. So that's fine, we've got our 1 row, but we need another 2 rows. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a for loop in here that controls this a little bit for us, so that we can basically repeat this column, these 3 columns manually by drawing a row. Okay, so we are going to create a for loop that has a starting statement and an end statement. And again, if you haven't seen me mention this already on my other tutorials, whenever there is a coding practice that requires partnerships, whether it's brackets or an opening statement and a closing statement, it doesn't matter whether it's HTML, CSS, PHP, whatever, I personally always like to start off by opening and closing the statement so that I know that I haven't missed anything out and cause myself sort of logic programming problems and bugs later on down the road. So we're going to start off by creating a, it's called a count or a counter, okay, and this basically tells the game where to start counting from. So we're going to start counting from the value of 1. Okay, we're going to keep going until we hit something to like our end result. So I'm just going to put that in capitals because we're going to change that in a second. And then we're going to go up by 1 iteration each time. So we're going to count basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc, etc. Instead of, if I'd have made this a 2, we would have been going up in 2, so it would have been 1, 3, 5, 9, 7, 9, etc, etc. Okay, but we're going to go up in counts of 1. Okay, so once we've done that, we're going to end our opening statement with the word do. Okay, so basically what this reads at the moment is, for the count of 1, we're going to meet some sort of end result, go up and count by 1 each time, and keep doing this loop until we have basically met some sort of end result. And that just basically here, this end word here, just tells our app where the for loop command starts and where the for loop command ends. Okay, so we'll worry about that end result in a moment, but as always, whenever I put a new piece of code on the screen or a concept, I always like to put a little print statement so that I know where we are in the console, so I know what's happening in the memory. So I'm just going to give myself a little print line command there as a little bit of feedback to say that this is basically a loop that we're working on. And then we now need to worry ourselves about this end result. So what are we going to do? Well, we can see on screen at the moment that there is 1 column, 2 columns, 3 columns. So let's create a local variable called number of columns and then equal that to the value of 3. Okay, so now we have our variable that has an end result condition. So what's going to happen now, I'm just going to move this, is we're going to print to screen. Let me just for the moment hide this, because I want you to look at the console, not the squares on the app. So we're looking over here in the console. Okay, when I hit save now, what's going to happen is we're going to draw a row. So we're going to read in from the top of the screen to the bottom. So as always, we're going to go through the start, create and show wheel sections. Okay, so we're in the show wheel section of our scene loading onto the app. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to read in this function so we know it exists, but we're not going to do anything. Then we're going to read in this function and we know it exists, but we're not going to do anything until we get to this point where we're actually calling the function to exist. So we're now going to say draw a row, at which point we're going to go up to here in our code. We're going to put the word draw row on screen like we've got going on over here. We're going to create a variable that has the number of 3, so that's 1, 2, 3 columns. Okay, and then we've got this loop, and this loop is going to iterate 3 times. So we're going to start at the first iteration, which is 1. We're going to test it against the value 3. 1 is not 3, so we can keep going. Okay, we now know that the next time we go through, we're going to up this number by 1 digit. Okay, and then we're going to print that for loop on screen. So we'll then come in here, we'll then know that our counter is at 2. 2 is not 3, so we're going to up it by 1 again, and we're going to print the for loop on screen, and then we're going to come in and it's now going to be 3, so our counter is going to be 3. 3 is the number of columns we want to finish, so we've got to finish this executing this particular command. Even though we're going to up it by 1, we'll now know that it means 4. So we're going to go in here, we're going to print for loop, and then we will test again in memory that our counter now says 4. 4 is not 3. We're going to therefore stop because we've met our condition. We don't need to do anything else, and therefore we'd have had the word for loop printed 3 times in the console. So I'm going to hit save, and that's going to basically take place now. There we go. So there was a slight delay as the program was executing, and then it finally finished all of this code, and then it came on down here to finish reading down the scene program file. Okay, so we know everything's fine, and as I've hidden the command to draw squares, our squares have disappeared, so everything is absolutely fine. So let's bring our squares back in. Let's take this command here now, okay, which we know draws our square. So it sends it the x and y coordinates that we've already set up here. So x and y has already been positioned for our starting location. Okay, we're now using that information to send it to this variable here. So what we could do to tidy up our app, because we're not going to need it anywhere else, is we could in here now have those functions, those commands, because it's not going to be needed to be used in any other location. So we're going to, in fact, okay, so what we've got now is our command to draw it, but we still need to update the x position. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the value of x, which we know is the starting location. We're going to assign it back to itself, but this time we're going to have added the value 100. Now we know up here that our boxes are 100 units wide and tall, so we know how to place it 100 points to the left or to the right, as it were. So that's why this is going to update, and every time that this loop takes place, this value is going to have changed. So we start off, let's say this starts off with the value of minus 100, or let's make it easy. Let's say this starts off with the value of 0. Okay, all right. So the first time we run this, it would be 0, then it would be 0 plus 100, so this would be holding the value 100, and then next loop through it would be 100 plus 100 equals 200, and the next one through it would be 200 plus 100 equals 300, and the next time through, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. So I'm going to hit save. Oh, I've obviously got a syntax error, bear with me a second. Near 102. Oh, look, I've knocked out my X. I've knocked out my Xpos. There we go. Sorry, that's my bad. And we're going to save and then refresh. Okay, so we've got our 3 squares back on screen. We've got them nicely aligning as a row, which is fantastic. So we know that this execution once is working by drawing 3 squares and then nicely positioning them in as a row. So what we could do is let's just change this code here a little bit by drawing the row. But what we could do is send in, like we've done the exposition there, let's send in the we could draw this, sorry, basically 3 times. Copy and paste and paste and paste, right? And then what we're going to do is we could technically cheat a little bit. Let's just move this down so that you can see where it's all aligning up. So let's move this down here. Okay, so X position, copy, let's send it there, and the Y position, copy. All right, so we've got X position in and like Y position in again. Let's bring them in up here. Again, I like to, when variables that we're passing to a function come into it, I like to add the word into the variable name. And if we ever have to pass them back out to somewhere, I like to add the word out. So this is just my way of dealing with things. So we know that this is now X position in, and we are working with that. So what we could do, and this is just a way of just showing you how to deal with some things, but we could have X position local just to this function now, which deals with this. And then we can copy that and put that as Y. And it might seem that this is like over sort of necessary coding, but it's quite good programming practice to get into, because when you are dealing with complex, far more complex than this, it helps you manage your code and think of the logic. So these local X and position and Y position variables now only exist inside here. So even though they've got the same name as these ones out here, our app knows, because we've declared them local, that they're not using the same one. It's actually another variable with the same name, and it's not going to interfere with one another, which is quite a nice way of controlling everything. Or what we could do is, because we need to send it X position and Y position, because what I'm going to do now is let's copy that, and like we did previously, is I'm going to add 100 and then I'm going to add 200 to this. Okay, now remember, if you haven't checked out the Lua coordinates, I have covered this in other tutorials, but the coordinate system, when you're working down the page, starts from 0 at the top of the display and works down. So we're going in a positive number. This is not the Cartesian grid reference system. This is the Lua grid reference system, as it were. So we are now going to draw the row 3 times, and every time we're going to start it on 100 pixels further lower than it was, or 100 units. So I'm now going to hit save, and with a little luck, we should now have a grid on the screen, which is awesome. Okay, so again, now there's a kind of an argument and a debate here, okay, because technically I have repeated the code or that call 3 times, and really I should only be calling it once if you're doing good programming practice. Now if I was doing a checkers board for something like a chessboard, for example, then we would need loads of rows and loads of columns, and so this is sort of technically bad practice. So let's just finish this off now with this is essentially drawing our columns for us. So drawing columns on the display so that we can keep an eye. So we've got our columns and we've got 1 row. What we could do now is we could actually have a function called draw grid. Okay, so let's do a local function. Let's keep all this together actually, because that's what we're going to tidy up our code in a minute. So let's local function draw grid. Okay, and then end. So again, opening statement, closing statement for our function, and now we know that everything goes inside it. And like I do all the time, so that we can see what's going on in the console, I just take the name, and this is my little way of checking on what's going on, and then we can delete it later on once we know everything is working. Okay, so we obviously aren't calling that just yet, so let's, just like we have before, let's just get ready to call that here. That's fine. So what we need to do now is we need to, instead of, let's take this out of here and put it in here. Right, and let's comment it out for a second. We're just tidying up our code. So like we've done up here, we've got this X position in, Y position in, drawing the rows, everything's going on, it's funky Dory, we've got a number of columns. We can actually copy this concept here and say number of rows that we actually need. Okay, all right, so that's fine. And now we can have another for loop that manages the printing of our rows, but we've pretty much wrote the code already. So I'm just going to copy that and I'm going to put that as rows. So we now know that we need to print this as a number of rows, which is all good. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to for loop, I've put rows so that we can see the difference, for loop columns, so that we know what's going on in the console. And we are going to, instead of draw the square, we're going to draw the row. All right, and for the moment, when we draw the row, we need to send it the X position and the Y position, so that's all fine. But what we need to do here is we need to update the Y position this time by 100, which basically makes this code here now redundant, so let's get rid of it. And then what we're going to do, just like we had up here with the X position coming in and the Y position coming in, we are going to have the same, and then we're going to have a local X and Y positions, which is fine. Where are we here? Okay, and that means we now have to have our X and Y's down here, and they need to go here. So when we send in our X and Y positions to start with. Okay, so this time when we draw the grid, we're going to send it the X and Y positions that we're going to start off with. Okay, so we are going to come into here and we're going to count the number. Oh, let me just see my little error. Copy, paste. We're going to count the number of rows that we need to create, and for every row we're going to send it the X and Y position. And all we're going to do is we're going to update the Y position for each row. Okay, so for the row comes in up here and it receives in the X and Y, which is great, and we've put them here so we can deal with it. But now we're going to change the X so that we can create the square to the right, and now we're going to send this data to draw square, and it will draw the square and it will come back in here. This for loop will still be going, so it's going to finish it a second and a third time to create that first row. Once that first row has met the condition of 3 squares being created, it's going to come back down here into loop number 2, which had been updated, and we should now, if I've got this correct, I hit save, our screen here on the display is not going to change, but we will have a different pattern of all the commands going on over on the right hand side. So let me just hit save. Everything's going to execute again. There's no errors, which is good. Visually, everything's doing what it needs to be doing. And now when we investigate, let's go to the start. So we've got our start, we've gone create, we've gone show wheel. So we know it's executing, and we've got our draw grid. So we've instantly come into here. Okay, so we've worked down the file, we've populated our X and Y starting locations, and then we've sent them to the grid. So we're drawing the grid itself. It knows that we've accessed this particular function's code. We've set the local variables, then we've asked it to access this loop, which is a loop for the rows, which we can see nicely on our code up here. Then that's called the function draw rows, and what we've got is kind of like this chain effect in our functions. This is going to draw our function, this is fine. This is going to draw our square executes, it comes back, finishes the next command, goes and draws a square, does it for a third time, draws a square. That's our row completed, come down, and it's basically all executed exactly as we want. Okay, so this at the moment is technically a sort of a job done, a fan-davy-dozer, for want of a better term, and so I'm happy with that and leaving it as it is. Now what we're going to do on our next tutorial is we're going to look at groups. So what I also don't want to do is also have to then try and calculate against it where our cross and our player's character 0 is positioned on the board, because we really need to group those characters in with the board positioning. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually create groups for our entire display of our app and for content as well, and we're going to learn to layer it up and how to control the different layers of our app and the different components within those layers. So we're looking at grouping objects and layers in our next tutorial. So if you haven't been here before, Please do subscribe, stay notified, add your comments, ask me your questions in the comments below on this video. I do jump in and look at them sort of 2-3 times a week, and I do reply where I can. And or if you have any questions or things that I can cover in future tutorials or things that you are stuck on, I will more than happily cover that if I can. That would be awesome. And that's it from me today, and we'll see you on the next video real soon.